Okay, so today we are very fortunate to have George Marshall and Mary Stockdale from Climate Outreach, which is a UK-based organization, but they have a global reach, and they have recently launched a climate engagement initiative, which George will describe just in a few moments. And also, following George, our own Izati Sintron will be sharing a little bit of the work that ECOS is doing that relates to this new initiative. So George, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mark. Lovely to see you all. I'm just setting up my stopwatch so I can try and come in on time on this. Cool. So I'm going to cover a little bit of ground of what climate outreach is as well, and some background theory, because even though you'll be very familiar with it, many of you will, it's still good to cover it because it shows where we're coming from. So I'm going to introduce, as Mark said, the Climate Engagement Initiative. If my thing's working. So why do we need a real transformation public engagement? So I know that ECOS has been using the language of transformation. We believe in climate outreach for all of our work, that we need a broad-based social mandate based on shared purpose and sacred values. And I'm going to keep bringing in these points and explaining what they might be. There's several reasons for this, and these are the reasons we're going to put to policymakers. But also, this is the kind of language we're seeking to insert into the policy debate. First of all, that we cannot achieve the climate targets without this mandate. We've been working a lot with the World Bank. We are advising governments on how to communicate carbon pricing. And you can see the picture on the left was what happened in Australia when they tried to bring in a carbon tax without that mandate, and it brought down the government. On the right is a situation in Australia where people are very strongly supportive of wind farms. They have that mandate. If we don't have the broad mandate, and broad meaning across all sectors of the population and all politics, then we simply do not have climate policy, simple as that. And also, a large part of achieving our climate targets is dependent on people making decisions in their own lifestyles. So it's essential that they're on board. So the argument we're saying is public engagement underpins all climate policy. But there's also social rights arguments of this. Another term that we are trying to insert into policy discourse is the right to know. And if we're effective, and somewhere down the line, if we do a search on LexisNexis or what's happening out there in the wider kind of conversation space, we're hoping that this term right to know is appearing regularly about climate change. Because at the moment, it isn't. But there is a right to know. There's a moral right to know. People have a moral right to understand what's affecting their future livelihoods, and there's a legal right, which, as you guys know, is also strong. So just unpack that a little. I think the moral right is that it is a basic human right for people to understand what's going to happen, and if people don't, they're going to make major mistakes. They're going to make bad investments. They're going to make bad decisions, which are going to leave them far more vulnerable to climate impacts. I just came back last year from doing work in Tunisia, where, amongst other things, we were interviewing southern farmers. Southern farmers are planting crops, for example, like olive trees, into a situation where those crops will not reach maturity because climate impacts will wipe them out. And they have no idea of what they're doing. People are making decisions about where they build houses when they're building on a floodplain. And that's happening in the US, a lot of that going on. So impacts have been greatly amplified. So there is a human rights aspect. And as we know, there's a legal aspect, and we're not even going to go through that. You guys know this very well. We've got the Framework Convention. We've got the Paris Agreement. In our view, these things are shamefully under-applied and under-implemented. I guess one of the things we want to do on the initiative is we want to bring in that language, strong campaigning language. This is not weak implementation. This is disgraceful, shameful under application of something that is a fundamental legal and moral right. That's the kind of level we need to take the language up to. But not just that. The Aarhus Convention, which binds in 45 countries in Europe and Central Asia, bound to guarantee rights of access and information, public participation in environmental issues, which includes climate change, the Escazú Agreement, as many of you probably know, Latin American, Caribbean. We have a lot of legal instruments, and these are under-applied, but also we're hoping as part of our campaign to bring on board legal experts to develop a legal strategy for enforcing them. And in the background, I was in this mob. This is occupying Oxford Circus, a major shopping street in the middle of London, with a demand, this is Extinction Rebellion, a demand to tell the truth. So there is a grassroots pressure as well to say, we must talk about it. We must start the conversation, people need to know. I guess the second question which emerges is why the governments need to be a primary focus. And this is a question which comes in particular from activists who say, well, governments, why do we even need them? Well, in this case, we do, because we can't think of any other institutions or entities that have the responsibility or the capacity or resources to do this, and of course, the legal requirement. And really, the important thing here is we need national engagement strategies to reach all audiences. And we're going to keep stressing this, all audiences. So activists and issue advocates are in the end only really interested in talking to their own audiences. And I have been watching with a lot of interest and full enthusiasm with the way that in recent weeks we've seen an expansion of discussion around Black Lives Matter and participation, and much larger in terms of issues of diversity. But I'm still waiting for somebody in these diversity conversations to say yes, and we need political diversity which reaches across the political spectrum. So there's a real danger in this that we're actually continuing to ignore groups of people who are already underrepresented in climate conversations, and as we know, then go ahead and oppose climate action or vote for populist politicians who oppose it. So governments are not necessarily the best communicators. Governments need to create the resources for the people who are trusted to communicate. Trust in government is very low. So governments have the resources to develop communications, if not necessarily to lead them. And they already are, they do. I mean, COVID, one of the things we'll be doing in our work and putting the case to governments that they routinely and regularly spend large budgets on public communications, and we could say also education, engagement on issues of health, security, terrorism, and so on. The budget for spending on terrorism has been, on terrorism communications has been hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Here in Britain, we had this absurd farce of getting out of the European Union, in which this year the budget for expenditure on it was £100 million for public expenditure. Posters I have here on the side here, a mailing which went out to every household in the country. As far as I'm aware, as far as I can find out, the government has not one single pound dedicated in the central budget for communicating climate change. And therefore, and we don't know what the expenditure is on communicating climate change because there is no strategy. So they know they need to do it. And hopefully coming out of COVID, people will have a better understanding. I just wanted to flag up for you, Climate Outreach has been doing a lot of quite pioneering work on communicating climate change during COVID. We have a report if you're interested in this. You know, COVID is going to change, COVID-19 is going to really change the game plan for what it's possible to do, people's willingness to participate, and this public communications, education, engagement landscape to be ready for. So a little bit on climate outreach and what good communications looks like. Hey, hi, this is our team. This was a little before Mary joined us. This is our wacky picture. We also have pictures where we're wearing ties and looking very serious and responsible. You can tell that you're the wacky audience. And we have a lot of partners and clients across many sectors. Not mentioned on this list here are our long-time lasting partnerships with grassroots networks. I am an advisor to Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for the Future, and Green Faith, and many community-based networks. I think we're very unusual for the way that we work across the board, both in terms of the nature of the institutions. We advise a lot of governments directly, but also politically. And again, to come back to the point, we have been actively working for many years with people across the political spectrum, both the left and the centre right, which I think is very important to this issue. Also, to flag up for your climate visuals program. This is really world beating, trying to look at the images which work and which don't work for the visual communication of climate change. So please, this is one of our flagship projects. Please share this with people. So we say climate change is is not understood as information. It's a narrative conveyed by trusted communicators, reflecting identity, validating their values. That report there on the right is the advisory report we wrote for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on how to communicate climate science, in which we said this, what we're saying here in this statement, is scientific evidence-based. Everything we do is based on research evidence, very often from the reviewed literature. And what do we need? Well, we need to be talking about transformational values, which are about the joy of belonging, sacred values, the things which we believe in, that we stand by, that we're not going to sacrifice. So sacred values are different from just the core values. There's no trade-off of sacred values, you know. There's my children don't have a market price. Nobody coming and offering me money for my kids can buy them off me. That's a sacred value. And a lot of climate communications is actually about economic values. We're saying sacred values. These posters are interesting because they come from a situation that shows that left and right, men, women, people across the racial divide would come together around shared values. So the messaging there is about that we can overcome our differences and our divides in order to work together for a common goal. This is a kind of ballpark where we need the communications. So things like when we're talking about climate impacts, talking about care, talking about how great we are when we come together with climate impacts, our communities come together, we care for people, we nurture people, we support each other, and that's who we are. This, by the way, is language we've tested very extensively, and it's very effective in speaking to people in the more centre-right constituencies who are often liable politically to be less supportive of climate action. We also have to make sure that we're dealing with trusted messengers, fundamental. That again means messengers of many different kinds speaking to different audiences with whom they're trusted. And faith networks. We've done a lot of work with faith networks. This is one of the reports which I wrote a while ago, Green Faith Consistent Partners. And we're looking to be training up people across the world through the faith networks to develop national communications speaking to the faith and shared values of togetherness within their different countries, always in the same ballpark. What do you care about? What do you love? What makes you proud? What's your core values, and how do we build climate identity around that? And that means very often not environment. We have to be talking about things which are outside that, because climate change is everything. Health, we know, is a powerful communicator, community. But also on the right here, you'll see some values which speak more to more conservative audiences. Family, faith, heritage, you know, landscape, fairness, interestingly, language which tests very, very strongly around communication of climate change. But climate change is not fair. There's a lot we can play with here. And just to say, we have done work all around the world, working with partners in different countries to develop language which works in those countries. So we started doing this in India. We did a large project in Alberta, a very large project actually, with over 70 partners. What language works in an oil-dependent state, province? And well, we explored that. Very happy to talk to you about it. Most recently across North Africa with countries across the region, all with strong Arabic, Islamic cultures. So in every case, we find something different. In every case, we need to find a language which speaks to people's identity and who they are. So that's where we're coming from. So we need a step change. We need governments to step up to the mark to meet their commitments. This is essential for moving forward on climate change, and that has to be developing language and narrative communications, trusted messengers for each different context that speaks to people's values, identity, and sense of belonging. How do we get there? Well, we encourage, we say, hey, this would be a really good idea. So in other words, we put the case of saying, you know what, this is really important for getting your policies achieved. This is really important politically. We support, we say, here's the evidence base. This is how to do it. This is what we know. We know how to do this well. And you in the ECOS network, you have a huge amount of collective experience in what works and what doesn't work. We also have to have a demanding component, whether that's us or whether that's our wider colleagues. We have to be saying, look, damn well do it. Do it. I mean, really, it's disgraceful. 30 years since the Framework Convention, and still they have not implemented Article 6. Disgraceful. So after working for many years on projects and projects and programs, developing research into communications, of our on that governments start investing in this properly, so that all of us and all of you guys and all of our colleagues who are working on this, we can all get a chance to do what we desperately want to do, which is to get out there and to tell people. So the Climate Engagement Initiative, that is a deliberately soft language. It started with different names, but the name we've settled on here is something which is just, it may not even have a public face. It's fine. It is an initiative and it pulls together different partners. So multiple partner, and ECOS, we are delighted, is one of our partners in this, all working in different ways, in interconnected ways, in parallel, as a high level initiative. This is what we wanted to do. We wanted to catalyze. So that means we don't just do it, but we stimulate a larger step change. We've got to talk step change, transformation. It's not another little project here or there. This has to be something substantive. Yeah? Governments and international government policy bodies, so that means the UN, but it might also mean a whole range of institutions. Quantity and quality. So it's not just saying, hey, we'd like you to go out there and start an advertising campaign in which you spend $10 million, because actually we know that's not going to work. What we want is, we want you to put in money to make it work based on the evidence based of what works around clear targets and objectives in order to achieve results, to build this broad-based social mandate. That's what we're looking at. So here are the different components of what's in our strategy. We've already shared the strategy with some of you. Laura, Satis, Mark has seen it, maybe some of the others. Thank you so much for all of the hard work you put in giving us feedback. Very valuable. We've read through all of that. So these are the things we're exploring. The first place is that we want to move into the global idea space. That's a silly name, right? But you know what I mean. It's for kind of moving global currents of policy ideas, the blogosphere, the articles, the policy dialogues, the conferences. And we want to get out there. The first step we're going to do is we're trying to map it and identify where the points of influence are. And then we're going to have these key components. Firstly, we've written a vision, which you guys have written and contributed to, and that we hope, once we know that you're absolutely happy with, can be distributed through the ECOS network and endorsed by your partner organizations. I'm going to go into a lot of detail on this, but you can see here the case is basically the case I've made in this presentation. The demands are here. And again, I won't go through them, but we can talk about them some other time if you like. But basically, anybody who hasn't seen it, happy to share this with you. This is going to roll out. The first step is we're just going to get some key partners on board. We're just going to like keep it amongst ourselves. But there is a point where we will go public with this. And when we do that, we're going to want some really high profile people signing up. So we're going to really go for bust to get a lot of people on board. Very broad representation, including lots from the global south, including a lot of representation from across the spectrum. In particular, we want indigenous organizations on there. We want a lot of social justice organizations, but we also want some unusual suspects too. We want to make this broad, saying this has to happen, because this is a tool to put this stuff out there. We're going to be writing 4 strategic reports. Now, again, this can all shift, okay? So this isn't set in stone. But this is what they're trying to do strategically. The first thing is, we have to establish that people don't really know what's happening. We're calling this stumbling in the dark for the moment. The assumption is that because the research shows that, generally speaking, in any country, 2/3 of people say that they're concerned or very concerned about climate change, but that is an indication that awareness is high. Not really. It's an indication that people are concerned. It does not mean they understand what's going on. We know from the research that we've done in these countries, in many of them, the first time anybody's done this kind of research, but people have a very limited understanding of the scale, the severity, the speed of climate change. In India, we did focus groups across India. Not a single person in any focus group made the connection. We asked them, what do you think is causing climate change? Nobody mentioned fossil fuels. Now, for a major coal-producing country, that is a problem. Because when we try and bring in the case of shifting from coal to renewables, nobody has the fundamental building blocks of understanding about why we need to do this. So we have to make the case for people don't know, and that we have to have targets for fundamental understanding of climate change, as we would for literacy or numeracy and so on. We have to make the case that national governments have failed to do anything. In other words, we're going to have to go out there and, a bit like I did earlier with Britain, we're going to have to say, hey, not a single developed major emitting country has an adequate strategy. So unpicking that is going to take a bit of work, because we have to define what an adequate strategy is and what it looks like. Of course, it might not be going through ACE. They might be developing it independent of ACE. But really, for our campaign, we need to be saying, hey, you know, Coca-Cola spends £400 million a year on advertising. The richest countries in the world, we can't find any evidence that they're spending hardly anything on the biggest issue of our time. So we want to make the case of what it is that governments have done on these other issues, COVID being obviously the big one, but generally health, terrorism, and so on, of saying, look, actually, governments do have systems in place for large-scale public communications. And obviously, of interest to you guys, that includes education, right? And if we take any issue, like we take drugs, for example, we'd say, look, part of drug spending is public communication, it's education in schools, it's communication, it's advertising campaigns, it's speaking directly to drug addicts and working with them. There's a lot of stuff goes in, which is public engagement. Finally, this is all going to come together into a whole report, which we were thinking might be launched at COP26. But really, it's not the report. I mean, who cares about reports? Who reads them? It'll be a set of spin-off products. So it'll be presentations given by me, or indeed anybody who feels skilled up to do it. It will be, you know, it'll be, who knows what. I'm hoping to angle a TED talk or anything basically which gets this stuff out there, making the case. So that's the idea space. International fora, you guys already very involved in terms of action for climate empowerment, COP26 and so on. So ACE, I don't need to explain that to you because you understand very well what it is. We are going to do everything we can, working closely with you on that. Sorry, there's a typo there. We're also going to make a recommendation that ACE should have an expert advisory group similar to the IPCC. We're calling it at the moment a panel on climate engagement, PACE, but basically a vehicle through which we and you and the specialists in this field can feed in advice and recommendations with a budget. Yesterday, we did a big specialist expert roundtable, working with our colleagues in ICEAL Alliance. Here you'll see they are a network which sets sustainability standards, in which we presented our report, which I'm very happy to share with you, on 6 principles for effective public awareness raising. We said awareness, not engagement, because that is one of the components of ACE. Again, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but you can see where we're going for this. So I know that you guys in ECOS you are also very interested in setting standards. We are too, and I'm sure that we're all involved for the same reason, which is without principles, we can't have standards, and without standards, we can't have targets, and we can't measure performance. And again, amazing in 30 years that this has still not happened, that there's a commitment with no mechanism for establishing what compliance looks like. So I think we need to pull in. Anyway, we started this conversation, it went very well. Maybe Mary can speak to how it went. We're working closely with the UK government, COP26, which is great. We got a very positive conversation with them. And so we can really help you and people in the wider community get access. You know, we can't promise that, you know, we can get you to the table, but we can certainly represent you in the conversations we're having. And we're having those all the time. UK government is very open to, at this stage, to suggestions about this, but They're a bit of a mess. They've got over 150 people working on it. It's a bit hard to pin people down, but we're hoping we can make public engagement a central theme, which, let's face it, hasn't been before. So those of you who were at Madrid, as I was, will remember there was virtually nothing there apart from ACE, virtually nothing talking about how do we build this public mandate, which is so important. So we're going to shift that. I'm pretty confident we will. We need to be working nationally. We need to be getting commitments into the NDCs, these nationally determined contributions. We need some countries to step forward and do really, really good gold standard exemplar work. Not just, it says here projects, not just about, but actual leadership, like saying, this is what it looks like to develop a national communications plan. You know, we've done the research, we've done the surveys, this is the plan. There are several people angling for that position. We have some vague hope that Canada might do it. Sitting on our call yesterday was a guy from the Costa Rican government, and Costa Rica has a strong interest in doing this. You'll see our partners there, WWF International, and we are hoping with WWF to put in a substantial funding bid for them to work at a national level to try and up the profile in the NDCs, because they have access. They are probably, along with Climate Action Network, the only real international network who can have that kind of government access. And onwards, what do we do next year? Well, we can do beyond that. So this will take us through until Glasgow. We already have funding from IKEA Foundation for this phase, which will end at the end of August, which is the development phase. Then we're going to go back to IKEA and other funders with a bigger proposal, and we would invite ECOS to work with us on that and see if there's a way we can support your work. And that will take us through to Glasgow. So after that, well, what could we do? Well, we're talking with legal rights organizations. Maybe they can sue the government. Maybe they take the governments to court, so you haven't done it. Maybe we can have a league table. Maybe we can have like an announcement at COP27 where we say, congratulations, Costa Rica, you know, you get a gold star, you know, Switzerland, you're rubbish, whatever we say, right? And as we said, maybe a formal panel of advisors. There's lots we can do. So you guys sent us a review of a strategy. Thank you very much for that. And this is a kind of an approximation of what comes out of that, of what we have, maybe slightly different. There's a lot of overlap between us, which is very exciting. We are not focusing entirely on UNFCCC and ACE, and you have a very strong interest in that. So we would hope that you can lead on UNFCCC and ACE, and that we can feed into that. Because we want to also free ourselves up to work at national levels, international levels, this kind of global idea space, lots of this. And there's a lot of work here, far more than we can handle in a little organization like Climate Outreach. You guys have a very strong focus on education, although I realize you have an interest across all aspects of ACE. We are very clear that we will not be involved directly with education. We feel that it's outside our expertise or training, although we've done a lot of work on it. Within the ACE context, we want to focus on awareness. So again, there's a lot of opportunity for us to work together in a complementary fashion. And it's clear we have a lot in common. I think our approach, our theory of change is very similar. We are all of us looking for standards and performance metrics. We have similar ideas about the target audiences we want to go for. We have a similar, I think, very positive approach to collaborative working. Climate Outreach is very partnership driven. We always work in partnerships, as we are with this. And of course, you guys are a network, so we were originally Climate Outreach Information Network. Before we became Climate Outreach, we were a network. And we need money, and this is an area where hopefully we can come together and we can work together on funding bids, because we want to open up the funders. We want the funders to put some serious money behind this, because it's seriously important. That means, say, that we get some money for our work, WWF gets money for their work, or other people we're working with. ECOS similarly should have your work supported. I realize there's some technical issues about how to manage that. And so we can support you well, amplify your work. We can bring in a range of people within our orbit that can support and work with you. We can maybe bring in funders. We can amplify your work also in terms of supporting and publicizing, Learn for Climate or your initiatives. And we're very happy to do that. We're delighted to be a part of it. And we think we can complement your work focused on education while work on awareness and just working together. How ECOS and your members maybe can contribute to our initiative? Well, we can bring together our strategies. We would like your network and members to endorse our vision and call to action and add their names to it. We would like some of these ideas, which we believe are not new to us, but new to the policy discussion, broad mandate, right to know, to help get those out there, because we are communication specialists, so we're very interested in communicating around new frames. Some of your partners will have access to national governments. That would be great to get those NDCs up and running. And you can join with us in making the case. So once we've lined up our ducks and we've got our arguments, we're not owning that. That material is shared and we can work together. We will be developing presentation packs and so on. We would very much welcome you and your partners to just use that material and just get the stuff out there. Again, nobody owns this issue. We all work together. I think that's me for now. I have a few slides also from Asatis, which you did, Asatis, on what you're doing, but I'm just going to stop there. And then if Asatis, if you wanted me to bring up, I put in your 3 slides, I can do that.
Do you have the, I was told that you have the slide. Should I be?
I have these 3 slides here.
Okay.
So if
Yeah.
you'd like to speak to them, you're very welcome.
You can just, you can just leave it in the second slide. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think there is a lot of similarities between our projects and in believing that ACE is a catalyzer for climate action, and in ECOS being recognized by the UN as the supporting community for education, communication, and outreach. We are working, like we have been driven by the commitment to work to ensure that no one is left behind, and that we are working for a world of empowered communities, governments, and actors, and network to rapidly implement equitable and urgently needed climate solutions from grassroots to global action. And always ECOS has been envisioned as the bridge between local, national, and global networks for climate education, communication, and outreach. So for us, in recognizing that climate change has a great diversity of impacts, we think that information strategies and approaches to engagement must be culturally sensitive and appropriate in order to be meaningful and useful. And this takes us to the importance of inclusiveness and engagement, not only on the way of implementing or communicating decisions, but also in the design of just climate solutions. So for us, it's really important that we work in solutions that have people at the center of them. It is incredible to see how connected the climate outreach is connected to our agenda, in believing that everyone has the right to know. We believe that people have the right to act and the capability of influencing climate decision making, and our call is on governments to follow through on a transformational climate empowerment agenda. As we discussed last week, our campaign has 3 main objectives, and that is the mainstreaming of ACE and advocating for a transformative global ACE network, which means developing policy recommendations that are grounded in cultural context. And we will be working at the international, national, and subnational levels. Being pretty confident in the depth of knowledge of our network in all the areas of ACE. We are also interested in research and mapping and development of metrics for ACE implementation. So what we want to do is to develop metrics to measure the implementation of ACE that have, as I said before, that are people-centered. That is a main component of what ECOS believes that ACE should be. So what we want is to gather our coalition to discuss the most useful level of these metrics and the right indicators through all the elements. So that question will be like, what does an effective implementation of ACE looks like? And it is great to have climate outreach leading the public awareness piece, which initialized, as George was saying yesterday, and we hope that we will continue to bring more perspective into this work. We want to coordinate strategies with the partners. We already discussed a little bit last week about the 20 soft launch partners that we gathered in June 8th. And as we are going into the hard launch that we want to do in coordinating agendas and taking into consideration the movements of the international political context, we want to gather more support and higher profile support, this meaning maybe governments or other influencing people to help us rise the profile of ACE. And in general, what we want is to develop a conversation space where we can support and catalyze systemic change. And very happy to be working with climate outreach and to trying to coordinate the different strategies between different partners, including like folks working in the education indicators and other practitioners that would be very important to include in the broad spectrum of this work. And that's all for me.
I was going to put out a question to all of you, which is just that at the start of our call yesterday, Adriana announced that Bonn is postponed from October to a later date based on how things are going with COVID. So that's news as of yesterday. I think Frank was there when she said it at the start of our meeting, and we're going to have to recalibrate our strategy timing a little bit because of that, and I imagine you will as well, Isatis and Laura.
Yeah, definitely. We were talking about that a few days ago, given the postponement of Bonn, and that's one of the next steps is to try to bring together all the partners and trying to figure it out what will be the best dates. So in the slide that was before, that's why I put the hard launch and I let go of October, and we didn't like try to coordinate it around that because we don't know what are those days. There's a lot of uncertainty when these are going to happen. So yeah, definitely we need recalibration. And one good thing about that is that it gives us, it gives us more time to really coordinate and develop a stronger strategy so we can come out of that better.